How's it going, everybody, and welcome to episode 154 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode, we're going across the Atlantic again, and I'm talking to Jeff Lowenfels, and he's the author of a new book called Teeming with Bacteria. And this is a series of books that I haven't come across. So this is the last one, or the latest one, should I say. It may not be the last. But his previous books, Teaming Up with Microbes, Teaming Up with Nutrients, Teaming Up with Fungi, and now Teaming Up with Bacteria. And there's a lot to talk about. We're predominantly going to talk about the new book, but we're definitely going to touch back on the previous ones. But interestingly, Jeff is the longest serving garden writer in America. And this is the bit that really caught my eye, because releasing a weekly podcast, I know how much goes into it. And I'm only doing it heading for 3 years, but he's the longest serving garden writer, garden columnist in America, in North America. And he hasn't missed a week in 41 years, which is quite incredible.
It's actually now 47 years, I might.
Oh, wow. So the website needs to be updated. That's incredible. So 47 years, never missed a week. Wow, that's brilliant.
But there is a story behind that your listeners ought to know about. In the United States, perhaps where people are listening to this, when you're not there, you're on vacation, they put your picture in where your column would be, and they say he's away on vacation. He'll be back in 2 weeks or whatever.
Right.
Well, to me, that always said, he's not home, go rob his house. And so as a consequence, I always have a column, and now it's become, sort of a religious, I can't miss a week. It's just, it would break the record, so.
Yeah, well, that is incredible. And I was just getting to it, but you're very, very welcome to Master My Garden podcast.
I missed that last part.
Yeah, sorry, it seemed to freeze there for a minute. So I was getting to it, but you're very, very welcome to Master My Garden podcast.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
So, as I say, I was sent a copy of the most recent book, which is Teaming Up with Bacteria. And I've been digging into it. But I think in order to cover it correctly, we probably need to take a step back and possibly to your first book, Teaming Up with Microbes. And I know, this book was seen as sort of groundbreaking when it was released, and it talks all about the food web. So maybe we'll take a couple of steps prior to this book first. And if you tell us about Teaming Up with Microbes, and then we'll lead on to the rest of them.
Sure. It's funny because there are 4 books in the series, and I would put this last one, Teaming with Bacteria, as the second one people ought to read. The first one is Teaming with Microbes. And what that book does is it explains the soil food web. You've had Dr. Elaine on here, but let me give you my really quick, dirty version. It's probably similar to hers because it's the only way the soil food web works. But the plant is in control, and the plant drips out using the photosynthetic energy. It produces things that it drips out of the root system that are called exudates. You and I are producing sweat. That's our exudate. And these exudates attract bacteria and fungi that live in the soil. They need carbon, and these exudates are full of that kind of thing, full of carbon. So they take that carbon, they eat it, they're very happy living right there in the rhizosphere, right up next to the root system, right up next to the roots, sometimes on the roots. And along come nematodes and protozoa, who also need carbon. They don't get it from the exudates, they get it by eating the bacteria, and they get it from eating the fungi. Now, nematodes are simply microscopic worms. They got a digestive system. They're just kind of microscopic worms. Protozoa are the things you studied in high school biology. They're amoebas and parameciums, and they eat and they poop out what they don't need. And it happens right there in the rhizosphere. And it then it has the right electronic form and moves into the plant and feeds the plant. So it moves from the soil into the plant. And so that's the basic soil food web. That was 2005 when that book came out. And then mycorrhizal fungi was added to the system. These are fungi that live in the soil and they don't get eaten. Instead, they end up partnering inside the plant and taking some of those exudates and in return giving the plant nitrogen and water and phosphorus and some other nutrients which the plant needs. So there's this little symbiotic relationship.
Yeah,
so everything is happy and fine. That's the soil food web.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one that you said. And looking through this book, I read one line where you said, I think it was, if somebody visits a nursery and they don't stock mycorrhizal fungi, you should find a different nursery or something along those lines.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
And that's really interesting and makes sense to me because, well, I use mycorrhizal fungi here, but it's not widespread. It is available in quite a few, garden center stroke nurseries, but it isn't widespread and it's not widely used here. But it definitely should be. And it's good that you said that because it sort of backs up what I think and see myself.
Well, and it shouldn't, certainly in places where you're starting things indoors and transplanting outdoors, et cetera, et cetera. I had a talk with one of your counterparts who's a fuzzy mammal. This was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and she had no idea what I was talking about or why I was even talking about it. But mycorrhizal fungi are very, very important.
Yeah.
Once you use them, they're in the soil. But if you're transplanting, I roll all my seeds, for example, in mycorrhizal fungi. But nonetheless, that's the soil food web system. Now you got to add to that things like rhizobia, these nitrogen fixing bacteria. That's part of the soil food web system that feeds plants. And then in 2010, a group in Australia discovered that some of these bacteria that are attracted by the exudates that are in the rhizosphere don't get eaten, but instead smell this popcorn smell. And it attracts them and makes them move towards that smell through the very new meristem root cells in the root system. And they find themselves inside the roots of plants, in between the cell wall of the root and the cytoplasm package of the root. They're in a space called the periplasmic space. And the best way to imagine this is in the United States, I'm sure it's the same thing over where you are, there is a tofu container. They're all the same. It's white on the outside, it's got this plastic and it's got this water inside, and then in the water's floating the tofu. That white and the plastic is the cell wall. The bacteria travel through there into that water system. They don't go into some do, but most of them don't go into that little white tofu section. They stay in this periplasmic water space. And the plant goes, whoa, wait a minute. And the plant, in order to protect itself, sprays them with an antioxidant, an oxidant, really super heavy duty stuff that strips the cell wall off of those bacteria. And the bacteria are going, hey, wait a minute, I don't have any cell wall. And they fight back by spraying the plant cell wall with a nitrous stuff. And this nitrite gets converted inside this periplasmic space to nitrate, and both the cell wall and the nitrate are absorbed by the plant into that white tofu-y section and used to make exudates and plant parts and flowers and fruits and everything else. Now, the bacteria are also producing ethylene, which causes the root hairs to stretch. And so the tip begins to stretch out as the bacteria give out this ethylene, and they're being circulated in that water, and they're multiplying every 20 minutes because that's what bacteria do. And these don't even have cell walls, so they're multiplying maybe even a little faster, and their population increases. They're producing nitrogen, feeding the plant. They're getting a little bit of carbon from the plant, and they're in this cell, and the cell's beginning to grow and elongate because that's what ethylene does. What happens is they get so many of them that they begin to back up into the cell wall of the plant, the meristem cell wall, and ethylene backs up there, it doesn't circulate, and ethylene causes a tube to form in this cell, And that tube, you and I know to be a root hair. But
Right.
actually, what it is a system whereby as it grows, the bacteria move into that root system. They're ejected out of the tip of the root system. As it's growing, 4 or 5 different bacterial explosions will occur, and they go back into the soil, these wall-less bacteria. They rebuild their walls, renutrify, and move back again 3 or 4 days later into the plant and repeat the trip. Now they're nitrifying, they're nitrogen fixing inside the plant. Wow, the plant's getting up to 30 or 40% of its nitrogen from bacteria that I'm betting to guess only 3 or 4 people who are listening to your podcast ever even knew were sitting inside these cells and getting exploded out into, I mean, so this is a major addition, 30% of the nitrogen. This is a major addition to the soil food web and how it operates. And there's a guy named Dr. James White, who is sort of the Elaine Ingham of this portion of the soil food web. He's a professor and a teacher at Rutgers University in the United States. And he's carried on this Australian information, and the things that they're discovering about these bacteria, the whole system's mind-blowing to an old guy like me. That's all I can say. It's very important. And so when you read about the soil food web in the first book, Teaming with Microbes, you then need to read about teaming with bacteria, the addition to that scene.
Yeah, it's incredible. And like, this is a garden podcast, but there's a few things popping into mind. Obviously, on this side of the Atlantic anyway, in the last couple of years, no-dig gardening has become, the right, most sought after gardening practice. And, everybody's trying to go that route, or as much as possible trying to go that route. And obviously that feeds the soil food web. And this is where, the benefits of no-dig gardening are coming to the fore. And but there's some interesting things in your book that make me wonder a little bit more about it. So obviously you're putting your compost on top of the soil. This is feeding the soil food web. It's, all your microbes, your bacteria, your fungi, they're all working there. In relation to the bacteria, so mycorrhizal fungi is not generally fussy. It'll attach to most plants, and I think I saw that in your book as well. With the exception of, I think, a certain strain is needed for acidic plants.
If you're plants your kids don't like to eat, cabbage,
yes,
Brussels sprouts, broccoli, all that family, the cole family, they don't form a mycorrhizal, but they do this bacterial thing. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So then the bacteria is quite specific. So, and I saw you make a note where you're saying that the compost that you use on a crop should be from the leaves and the stems and so on, compost made from that crop in order to sort of keep.
Yeah, there are a couple of rules that you want to follow in order to keep these bacteria working healthy. These bacteria, by the way, are known as endophytes. And the system that I've just described is known as the Rhizoghagy system. It's pronounced differently by other people, but Rhizoghagy is how I say it. You're going to end up with a different pronunciation, and I can tell you the Australians have a really different. But in any case, some bacteria end up in the plant and move through. They don't just feed the plant. Some of them actually move into the plant, different cracks and ways, and move throughout the plant and end up in the flower and get caught up in the seed. So the seed of the plant contains the bacteria, literally, that the plant needs. There are studies that have 400-year-old corn, and it's got the same bacterial mix today that it had 400 years ago. I mean, my goodness gracious. So what you want to try to do is everything you possibly can to keep that good bacteria feeding your garden plants. And you do that by making compost, if you possibly can, using the plants that you're actually going to end up feeding if you can't. So if you grow tomatoes, you make a tomato type compost. I mean, it's not that simple, but you get the general idea. You don't take the roots out when you take a tomato out of the ground, you cut
Leave
it
them in the ground.
and you leave the roots there and you let because there's bacteria still eating that exudate all over the place, and new roots will grow down the existing channels and take off food and exudates and bacteria and even fungi from the it's, the whole no-dig system supports both the regular soil food web and now this new enhanced soil food web, for all the obvious reasons that people come up with.
Yeah. I'm going slightly off topic here. So we have a large, it's Europe's largest, what they call farming exhibition. It's called the Ploughing Championships here. So it's basically a 3-day event. It has ploughing as, the art of ploughing as part of its competition, but then there's lots of stalls there. And I went to it this year, and it was interesting because obviously fertilizer prices around the world have gone up through the roof. And it was notable this year that there was at least 7, 8, 9, 10 maybe stands this year with different types of bacteria. People were selling bacteria, and there was various trade names on it. And essentially this is, what we're talking about here in a way.
This is the future. This is the future.
Yes. So they were talking about 30-40% reduction in fertilizer, and that was very attractive to people given the year that's in it and so on.
And it's going to get better when they actually, as they're now developing endophytic bacteria for specific plants that will fix all of the nitrogen that the plant needs. Now, can you imagine a wheat plant? It's not going to have the nodules that you get with a clover plant or a legume, but it's going to be able to produce its own defenses and its own nitrogen. Wow. And its own phosphorus. We're going to be able to do some pretty interesting things if we pay attention and do it properly. This should be, we don't want to create Frankensteins, that's for sure. But
and I know we
want to do it right.
This is that's obviously going to be the future. And it was interesting because I spoke to a few of them out of interest, because a couple of them had garden products. So I spoke to a few of them out of interest, but very few of them were able to explain what exactly is happening. They have a bacteria product in a package. They know that it's reducing the requirement for fertilizer by 30 to 40%, but none of them really knew what was happening. I was wondering, like, some of them sourced in the UK, some of them sourced in the States, actually. But then in your book, you're kind of saying it's specific. So if, for example, an Irish field, and I'm bringing a bacteria from a company in the UK or the US, does that work? Or does it need to be a native bacteria?
No, you need to test it to see whether it works. Now, for example, there's a bacteria azobiome. Anyway, there's a bacteria that was found in Brazil that's very effective on wheat, corn, all over the world. And there are substrains in India and substrains in Russia and different places that probably do better. And in some instances, they've been able to commercialize them. But you got to test it. You have to figure it out. We know the bacteria go into these plants because when you take the bacteria out of plants, they don't form root hairs. Root hairs are formed for this bacterial rhizophagy, not to get nutrients. Now, it happens to be that they have very thin walls, those tubes that are created, they're brand new, and they're able to absorb nutrients. And so they perform that function after they get rid of these bacteria back into the soil again. But when you go to a garden nursery, you're going to be able to find, you already can find nitrogen fixing bacteria for legumes. You can find in more and more places the mycorrhizal fungi. The reason I think why you're a little late to it as compared to the United States is the company that sold 90% of them was an Oregon company, and they just weren't thinking. That company has been purchased by a company that has international reach and is now obviously pushing the product. They also work, which makes a great deal of difference. But you'll be able to find these bacterial products as well. But again, you've got to test them to make sure that they work on your particular crop, because each plant's different.
Yeah, and so bacteria, we've seen, or I've seen, and you're speaking about the ones now that are essentially reducing the need for fertilizers. But there's also bacteria that are fungicides in a way, not insecticides, but they're performing the task of an insecticide. So what are we looking at here? Are they the same?
Yeah,
they're the same bacteria.
Some are. Yeah, without knowing which one you're speaking of, I mean, most of them are endophytic bacteria. These endophytic bacteria cause a couple of things to happen, and that includes these rhizoghagy. When the plant detects that a bacteria is invaded or has come into the plant, as soon as it gets into that paraplasm and sprays that superoxide on it, it has to also make sure that it's not destroying its own cell, because that superoxide strong stuff. And so it increases its ability to handle stress, all sorts of stress, abiotic and biotic. And so you end up with bacteria that are living inside the plant. And why would a bacteria do that? It does so because there's no competition, other than this little spray every now and then, but there's no competition. And it gets to do what bacteria are supposed to do. All organisms, you're supposed to reproduce. And so you've got a nice safe spot. As you're reproducing, you're producing metabolites. You're not only strengthening the plant, by having it spray itself and strengthening itself, but you're giving it metabolites. You're producing phytohormones like gibberellic acid and auxins. There are 5 or 6 phytohormones that a bacteria can produce. Phytohormones meaning hormones that a plant produces, and they help the plant. So some plants are able to withstand cold temperatures or warmer temperatures. Some plants are able to withstand an insect attack because the bacteria protects the plant because it needs that home for itself. Unbelievable things that happen, and we haven't really been able to see them until confocal microscopy was developed. And so that's what happened. In the book, you'll see some pretty amazing pictures of I hope the copy you got had the pictures of bacteria. It's just incredible. They're everywhere, and they are doing some great things. And they also sometimes jump off the roots and help a fungi, for example. They'll help a fungi get phosphorus and then bring it into the plant. They'll help a fungi break down foods so that the fungi can take the foods and bring it into a plant. So there's this incredible symbiotic situation that's going on that's feeding your plants. Now, you can do it yourself by using that blue or green powder. But once you do that, they go away, and the plant goes, wait a second, I don't need to be feeding these guys. Why am I using 40% of my photosynthetic energy to produce exudates when I'm getting free food from this crazy guy who doesn't even have enough sense to wear a hat? Anyway, and so it shuts some of the systems down. You don't get the same, and it messes. You are the soil food web, and when you're not there, the plant doesn't eat well. That's not a good situation. That's called setting yourself up for a lot of work. Let the microbes do the work.
So that's the sort of very shortened version of the science behind it. Taking it into sort of layman's gardening terms, and somebody is looking to improve their soil, their garden.
Sure.
What kind of steps are we talking about, and what benefits are we likely to see?
Right.
We've talked about some of them, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, we mentioned some of them. Incidentally, in the back of Teaming with Microbes, there are 19 soil food web rules. that's an odd number. There should be 20. There was 20. Unfortunately, the last one my publisher took out. I didn't know they were going to do it.
Right.
And it was, don't lend this book to anybody, make them go buy their own copy. Anyway, I think the primary rule is there are no bare soils in nature. So why are there bare soils in your garden? There should always be a cover on your soils that helps feed the microbiology in your soils. And we know through Dr. Elaine and others, some of the research, that you want to have a soil, particularly for a vegetable garden or a row crop garden, that is more dominated by bacteria than fungi. You need fungi, but you need more bacteria. If you've got a perennial or a tree or a shrub, anything that's in the ground for more than a year, you want more fungal. And depending on how long it's in the ground, like an old growth forest, you want a lot of fungal compared to bacteria. What actually happens is the bacterial number basically stays the same. The fungal number grows as detritus falls from these plants, etc. But if you don't have bare soils and you have the right kind of mulch, you're continually keeping that microbial herd alive. And so green mulches are what go on annuals and row crops, and brown mulches are what go on old and in the ground for more than a year. If you've only got brown leaves, for example, grind them up and make them as fine as possible so that the bacteria can get into them as early as possible, and you'll just be fine. Basically, that's all the gardener has to do.
And by green mulches, you're meaning chop and drop type.
Yeah.
So
when a leaf falls, it's green. It's got a lot of sugars in it. Straw has sugars in it. You want to make sure I can never remember. Hay is the one that has the seeds. Straw doesn't have seeds in theory, but you want to make sure it doesn't have seeds. Green living mulches are a green mulch. The clovers and etc.
And so I think that's like for gardeners here, like we have a lot of listeners in the US, and I'm sure they're sort of familiar with some of these things and terminologies. Here in Ireland, funnily enough, no dig is starting to gain traction now, but there's still a lot of bare ground in vegetable gardens. So
that's
number one rule that needs to be covered, and that's really we're talking about exactly what you said there: green mulches, green manure. Like typically what happens is people grow their veg, they get to this time of the year, there's nothing left or not much left there, and they just leave the ground bare. But really, at the very least, the green manure there over winter is something that is a must.
Oh, so important, because it takes a while for this stuff to break down. If you wait until the spring, to mulch, it's really not giving the benefit. And even where it snows, I live in Alaska, even where it snows, there's always a layer between the ground and the snow level where there is a tremendous amount of decay going on. Microbial activity doesn't stop. You just get different kinds of microbes. And so it's very important to get it down in the fall as early as you can, and then you leave it there. You might pull it back in the spring if you live in a place like Alaska where it's frozen. You let the ground thaw and you put it back. But once you put it down, you should always have a layer of mulch. Compost counts as a layer of mulch as well, if you don't have anything else. Compost definitely counts as a layer of mulch. I use, not that, I like about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch compost, and then I put it right in over my mulch or even under my mulch in the fall. And it's the way to go.
Yeah, that's so that's rule number one. No bare ground. What other steps? So I see you talk quite a lot about inoculants and teas and so on. So
the teas are less. They're very hard to demonstrate scientifically. We've all done it ourselves. You try it on your own plants and it works, and you put it on the lawn and it works. But compost definitely works. Compost is, got everything that you need. Instead of making the tea, you might think about a compost compress, where you put it in a bucket and you let it stir it for 15 minutes and then just put it in a cheesecloth and squeeze it. The idea of using compost wherever you possibly can, spreading it on lawns makes a tremendous amount of sense. Obviously, no rototilling. Rototilling, even though it's an English invention, or maybe specifically because it is an English invention, is a big no-no. A guy named Jethro Tull, who believed back in the day in the humus theory, that plant roots ate soil. Isn't that clever? Doesn't that sound like rhizophagy? Plant roots eat bacteria, not soil. But in any case, since they were eating soil, he figured, well, let's pulverize it up. Now, in the United States, so he invented rototilling. In the United States, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, John Adams, these people were known not as the founding fathers, but the founding gardeners. And they were all farmers. And they read Jethro Tull's work. And Jethro Tull convinced them that you should be rototilling. And it made sense in America because we were taking old growth, fungally dominated soil, and we were converting it to bacterially dominated soil by grinding it up. So you rototill once, and then that bacterially dominated soil could support the row crops, the cotton, et cetera, the annuals that we were growing here. So you can rototill once if you must, but after that, never again. And even then, when you think about it, why not just take a 2x4? I would love to go to that convention you just came from. For one, I would love to speak there because I could explain to these people what each of these products does. But two, I'd love to take part in the trials. I would march out with a big dowel. You know what a dowel is?
Yeah.
And I would just take the dowel and I would run it right down, make about a little quarter-inch, half-inch groove. That was it. That's all I would do. And everybody else can get their big compounds out. People are using mortarboards now, and they're really making the least amount of disturbance that they can. Home gardeners shouldn't make any disturbance. Use a dowel, drill a hole. Use your hoe, use the handle of one of your tools. That's all you need to do. We've all seen plants using the soil food web, I might add, grow through tarmac and pavement and cement. That's what plants do. And the power they get literally comes from those roots expanding. Part of that comes from the ethylene that the bacteria are producing in those tiny little brand new meristem cells. Wow.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. And it seems like we're talking about, keeping the ground covered. And I know like across the world, everything has to change and probably has to change quite quickly. Yeah. Especially in industrial agriculture, it has to.
We have 60 years left. We have 60 seasons left.
In soil, basically.
That's right.
Yeah. That's an incredible statement, isn't it? Incredible fact rather than a statement. Yeah. It's hard to believe. But
we better start believing, though.
Yeah, we better start believing, and it does have to change. But what's funny, isn't it, that we're kind of going back. We're going back a long way to move forward again, aren't we? Right. Because this stuff, the soil food web, while being brought to the fore over the last number of years, it's always there operating when given the chance. And for a period of time, we sort of obliterated it, and now it's coming back to the fore, and all of these, all of these bacteria and all of that comes with it. So we're kind of going backwards to go forwards, but it has to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, or maybe we took a detour and we're getting back on the straight and narrow.
That's probably a better way of putting it. That's a better way of putting it.
I mean, there's no question. We're using the old World War II munitions for fertilizers. I mean, these they're explosives, these nitrogens. So yeah, we're definitely going the wrong way in that regard. But it's sort of similar to what happened in England during the late 1800s, when people began to realize we're running out of nitrogen, which came from islands where they would go dig the whole island up and and take the lime away, and so the Royal Society made a challenge to anybody who could come up with an artificial nitrogen, and they did. And so we don't want to have artificial soil. We want real soil. And so we need to, I don't think hydroponics is the answer. Real soil and being able to treat it, it's a carbon sink, all the good stuff that happens with regard to soil. When we stop treating the soil poorly, when we use our machineries in a different way, things get better. So that's what we need to be doing. And it starts at home, folks. Just like feeding the hungry, if I can just get one more little sneak in here, we have a program called Plant a Row for the Hungry. Anybody who listens to this show should plant one row in their garden. And then when it comes time to harvest, take that food to some place or some person that needs it, someone that's hungry, food bank, soup kitchen, a neighbor, a church, wherever. Nothing slips between the lip and the cup. You do it. There's no administrative cost or fees. You're just helping to feed the hungry. Gardeners should share. That's what we're supposed to do. We share my knowledge, and we should be sharing your food. That's simple.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. I was going to mention that. It's really interesting, and I'll tell you why. I recorded an episode yesterday about community gardening, and the lady I recorded it with, who doesn't live actually that far away from me, she was involved in a European program, European funded program, where there was community gardens in 6 or 7 different countries, and they all met up and they took the best elements from each garden, and they're trying sharing information and so on. And one element of it was from a Greek community gardens, was that they were donating, so 20% of the food that was produced on these community gardens went to the homeless societies, or I know one of yours is the soup kitchen. So those type organizations in Greece. So 20% of the food within the community garden went to that. And we spoke about that only yesterday. So it was really interesting to see it on your website and to read about it on your website, and now to hear you talk about it.
Well, I think gardeners are the only sane people left. So, we need to make sure we hold the world together.
Yeah, but even for a gardener, like, it really is, that is, because we all here in Ireland, we all have certain times of the year where we have gluts of, particularly things like tomatoes and so on. And it's so logical to donate and deliver, whatever way you want to put it, some of that produce to some of these bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so easy to do. In the United States, we have a joke: you never park your car on the street during the season, because when you wake up the next morning, you find that somebody put all of their extra zucchini in it. So you got to be very, very careful. But yeah, there's so much stuff we waste. Gardeners waste so much food, and it's just a silly thing to do. We're lucky enough to be able to garden. We should help other people out. And by the way, speaking of garden, container gardening, Soil Food Web works on containers as well. It's the whole system. This is the science behind organic gardening. And if you're chemical gardening, you're not gardening. You're playing chemistry, and that's a completely different hobby, and it's not a good one. So get rid of it.
Yeah. So it's amazing. Like when I had Dr. Lane on, it was mind blowing as well, and we could have talked for hours. It's a bit the same here, because there's so much in it, and well, your book is very detailed. And
but I gotta interrupt you right there. I did not invent the teaming with microbe stuff. That's Dr. Elaine. I did not invent rhizophagy. That's Dr. James White. All I do is try to dumb it down so that I can understand it. And it turns out I got a really pretty low common denominator. I'm able to send it out to everybody else.
Yeah, and it makes sense. So for anybody listening, definitely microbes, soil food web, fungi, bacteria, you definitely need to be promoting that within your garden. And we've, Jeff has mentioned some of the golden rules. And so I think if you're gardening in that way, and particularly, in your food garden, but also in your ornamental garden, but particularly in your food garden, you're going to see benefits. All the benefits that we speak about when we talk about no dig, they're going to start to come to the fore. And you are creating a garden that's going to be so much more resilient and productive for yourself. So it definitely is the way to go. Your books, Jeff,
and easier to take care of as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I forgot that part. Yeah.
The books, the latest one is teaming up with bacteria, but the other ones teaming up with microbes, teaming up with nutrients, teaming up with fungi, and as I said, the latest one teaming up with bacteria. I presume they're all available in all the usual places.
They are, and they're like translated into 10 languages. You can get Audible, you can get Kindle, you name it. You want it in Korean, I have it. You want it in Dutch, I have it.
Brilliant. People can find you anywhere, but on your website, your website is?
No. They can find me at jeff@gardener.com. Jeff@gardener, just like you spell it, .com. It takes me a little while sometimes to answer back. No spam, please, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, brilliant. Jeff, it's been a brilliant chat. I hope to hear and see in the next number of years that the article, the weekly column has gone up to 50 years, or what's the target, or is there a target?
100.
Brilliant. Yeah, amazing. As I say, I know what goes into it, so hugely well done in 47 years of a weekly column. It's incredible, really is. And the book
incidentally, if anybody wants that, it's at www.adn.com.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's the weekly column is on that. Super.
Yeah.
The book itself is brilliant. I've been siphoning through it over the last couple of weeks since I got it, and yeah, it really is interesting stuff. And bits of it are quite sciencey, but when you just go slowly through the first bit, you start to see exactly what's going on, and then as it comes through to the end, you can see what benefits are going to come from it. And it's clear that over the next number of years, we're going to see just way more of this. Pretty much anything that's going to come through over the next number of years will be bacteria based. So it's as I say, phenomenal and well done. And yeah, thank you very much for coming on Master My Garden podcast.
Anytime, as you can tell, you can hardly shut me up. I'm happy to do it. Happy to do it. Nice to meet you, John.
You too. So that's been this week's episode. Huge thanks to Jeff for coming on. It was a great chat, and definitely those books. I'm going to have to go back now and get teaming up with microbes because the bacteria one is superb. But Jeff has mentioned it there, and we spoke about it before. If you're gardening, you need to be doing, trying to get that soil food web working and all those elements within it. And if you do, you're just going to be successful, naturally going to be successful. So I can't stress how important it is. We spoke about no dig gardening on so many occasions here, and that is part of it. And if you can just get that working correctly, it'll make your life so much easier. And yeah, that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening. And until the next time, happy gardening.